Have you ever scrolled through your feed, seen someone's vacation photos, their new house, their perfect partner, and suddenly felt smaller? That quiet sting you feel is something every human knows. It's called social comparison. And while it's a natural part of how our minds work, too much of it can quietly shape our mood, our confidence, and even our sense of identity. Psychologists have been studying this for decades. The idea was first introduced by Leon Festinger in 1954. He suggested that we have an innate drive to evaluate ourselves, our abilities, our success, our happiness, by comparing them to others. It's how we make sense of where we stand in the social world. But the world Festinger described looked very different from ours today. In his time, your comparison circle might have been a few dozen people, neighbors, coworkers, friends. Now with social media, it's thousands. And each of them curates their best moments, their highlight reels, their filtered smiles. Imagine a stage with 1,000 performers, each showing only their best act. You watch them all and then turn inward, judging your own behind the scenes. No wonder it hurts. Research supports this effect. A 2018 study from the University of Copenhagen found that people who took a one-week break from Facebook reported significantly higher levels of life satisfaction and lower levels of stress. Why? Because they temporarily stepped away from that endless stream of comparison triggers. Social comparison isn't always bad, though. There are two main types, upward and downward. Upward comparison happens when we look at people we think are doing better than us. It can motivate us, push us to improve, inspire us to grow. But it can also backfire, especially when the gap feels too wide. You might think, if they can do it, maybe I can too. Or you might think, I'll never be like them. Same comparison, different outcomes. Downward comparison, on the other hand, is when we look at people who seem to be doing worse. It can make us feel temporarily better, a small boost to self-esteem. But over time, it can make us complacent or even guilty. Neither extreme truly serves us if it becomes a habit. One fascinating experiment from Stanford showed that people who frequently compared themselves to others experienced lower self-worth and more anxiety, even when their actual achievements were objectively strong. It's not about reality, it's about perception. Think about it this way. Your brain is constantly scanning for reference points, like a GPS trying to locate your position. Without comparison, you lose your mental coordinates. But if the reference points are distorted, the map becomes misleading. That's what happens in the age of Instagram and LinkedIn and TikTok. We're comparing our unfiltered lives to everyone else's highlight reels. A 2022 survey by Pew Research found that 64% of adults admitted to feeling worse about their own lives after scrolling through social media. And among teens, that number jumps even higher. Comparison exhaustion is real. The brain circuits behind this are surprisingly deep. Neuroscientists have found that the ventral striatum, a region linked to reward, lights up when we see ourselves as doing better than others. But when we perceive ourselves as doing worse, the same area shows reduced activity, while regions tied to pain and self-evaluation, like the anterior cingulate cortex, become more active. In other words, comparison literally feels like pleasure or pain inside the brain. It's not just emotional, it's biological. Now let's pause and think about why this hurts so much. Part of it comes from something called relative deprivation. It's not the lack of what we have, it's the feeling that someone else has more. You could be earning a good salary, living comfortably, even objectively successful. But if your peers seem to be doing better, your satisfaction plummets. A classic study from Princeton showed that people's sense of happiness was more strongly tied to how their income compared with others than to their actual income level. This is why a raise sometimes feels less satisfying if your coworker got a bigger one. Our ancestors evolved this sensitivity for a reason. In small tribes, knowing where you stood in the hierarchy mattered for survival. Who got resources, who got protection, who got mates. Comparison helped keep balance and competition in check. But in modern life, that same mechanism is hijacked by digital algorithms that constantly feed us curated lives. Your mind sees the success of others as evidence of your own failure, even when that logic makes no sense. Let's take an example. Imagine you just started learning guitar. You scroll through videos and see a 12-year-old prodigy playing effortlessly. Your first reaction might be amazement, but your second reaction might be deflation. You think, what's the point? That's upward comparison in action, motivating for some, demoralizing for others. The difference lies in interpretation. If you see that person as proof that growth is possible, comparison becomes fuel. If you see them as proof that you're behind, comparison becomes poison. The key lies in awareness. When you catch yourself comparing, pause and ask, what's the story I'm telling myself right now? Is it I'm not enough? Or is it I'm inspired to learn? That small shift changes everything. Psychologists call this reframing. It's not about pretending others' success doesn't matter. It's about reclaiming your perspective. A 2021 study from the University of California found that people who practiced cognitive reframing during social media use reported a 25% decrease in envy and a 15% increase in motivation. That's the power of how you interpret what you see. Another useful insight comes from the concept of self-compassion, popularized by researcher Kristen Neff. Self-compassion means treating yourself with the same kindness you'd offer a friend who's struggling. It sounds simple, but studies show it dramatically reduces the emotional sting of comparison. When you see someone else succeed, instead of thinking I'm failing, you can think I'm human and I'm learning. That tiny change rewires the emotional response. Let's go deeper. Comparison pain often hides deeper fears. Fear of inadequacy, fear of being unseen, fear of not belonging. When we compare, we're really asking, am I enough? But enough is a moving target. If you measure it by others' standards, you'll always fall short. If you define it by your own growth, you'll always have a chance to win. One way to ground yourself is to measure progress backward, not sideways. Look at who you were a year ago, not who someone else is today. Harvard psychologist Teresa Amabile calls this the progress principle, the idea that the single biggest driver of motivation is feeling that you're making progress in meaningful work. Not being the best, just moving forward. You can practice this by keeping a small comparison journal. Each time you notice that sting of comparison, write down what triggered it and what it might be pointing to. Maybe it's not jealousy. Maybe it's a hint about what you value. If you envy someone's fitness, maybe you're craving health. If you envy their creativity, maybe you're craving expression. Turn comparison into a compass, not a weapon. There's another layer here. Social comparison doesn't just affect individuals. It shapes entire societies. Economists have found that when inequality is visible, people report lower happiness, even when their own circumstances don't change. Simply seeing others with more creates psychological strain. It's why cities with higher income gaps often report higher levels of anxiety and depression. Our brains are wired to monitor fairness, and when it feels off balance, we feel threatened. But here's the hopeful part. Awareness changes everything. When you name comparison, you take back control. When you understand its roots, you stop letting it dictate your worth. And when you choose gratitude, real, grounded gratitude, you soften its edges. Gratitude doesn't erase ambition. It gives it context. It reminds you that what you have right now is enough to start from. A 2020 study in personality and individual differences found that people who practiced daily gratitude journaling experienced a 23% reduction in social comparison tendencies after just 2 weeks. That's not magic. It's mindset. So what can you do practically to ease the pain of comparison? First, curate your inputs. Follow people who inspire growth, not insecurity. Mute or unfollow accounts that trigger constant self-doubt. Your mental environment matters as much as your physical one. Second, celebrate small wins. Each time you notice progress, no matter how minor, acknowledge it. Your brain releases dopamine not only when you achieve big goals, but also when you recognize effort. Tiny victories stack up. Third, practice what psychologists call attentional control. When you catch yourself comparing, gently redirect your focus to something tangible, your breath, your surroundings, your current task. This disrupts the automatic loop of comparison before it spirals. And finally, connect more deeply in the real world. Face-to-face interactions remind us that everyone's life is complicated, messy, human. The more authentic connection you have, the less power curated images hold. Remember, comparison is an ancient tool, not a modern truth. It evolved to guide us, not to punish us. But in today's hyper-connected world, it's easy to forget that the images we see are fragments, not full stories. Even those we envy are comparing themselves to someone else. The truth is, everyone feels behind sometimes. Even the people who seem ahead. We're all walking different paths, at different speeds, through different terrain. The only fair comparison is between who you are and who you're becoming. If you've ever felt that subtle ache after scrolling through your feed, you're not weak, you're human. But you can train your mind to respond differently. Each time you notice comparison creeping in, take a breath and ask, what is this trying to teach me? Sometimes the answer will surprise you. Maybe it's telling you what you value. Maybe it's showing you what you fear. Maybe it's reminding you to slow down and define success on your own terms. As we wrap this up, take a moment to think of one person you've compared yourself to recently. Now, imagine their life in full, not just the polished parts, but the unseen struggles, the doubts, the late nights. Everyone carries something invisible. When you remember that, empathy takes the place of envy. And that's when comparison loses its power. If you found this helpful, take a moment to subscribe to Tortoise Brain. It helps you stay connected to thoughtful, science-based insights on how the mind works at a calmer pace. Your worth is not a scoreboard. Your journey is not a race. You're allowed to grow quietly at your own rhythm without needing to match anyone else's highlight reel. The next time you feel that sting of comparison, smile gently and say, "I see you." Then turn your focus back to your own path. Because that's where the real progress happens. Inside, not outside. And maybe, just maybe, that's the only comparison that ever truly matters.